President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy have reached a deal to raise the debt limit, and now they are racing to convince lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to back the plan. The House is set to vote on the deal just 2 days from now.
Mr. President, what do you say to members of your own party who say you've made too many concessions in this deal?
They'll find I didn't.
I think you're going to get a majority of Republicans voting for this bill. This is a good bill for the American public. The president agreed with this bill, so I think there's going to be a lot of Democrats that go vote for it, too.
And the House Progressive Caucus already speaking out against new work requirements in the deal for food stamp recipients.
It is really unfortunate that the president opened the door to this. And while at the end of the day, perhaps this will, because of the exemptions, perhaps it will be okay. I can't commit to that. I really don't know.
And the conservative House Freedom Caucus also pushing back against the deal, saying it does not cut enough spending. Some key members tweeted, "No Republican capitulation," and "Hold the line." As for the debt ceiling, the latest warning from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen estimates that the government could run out of money to pay all of its debts on time, the so-called X date, on June 5th, 1 week from today. CNN chief correspondent Manu Raju live for us on Capitol Hill. So Manu, for those of us just waking up on a Monday morning who may not have been following this Saturday and Sunday, break down the deal for us.
Yeah, look, this was a hard-fought negotiation, a negotiation that the White House didn't want to have to begin with. Remember, President Biden, for about 3 months, more than 3 months, just refused to sit down with Kevin McCarthy because he demanded the debt ceiling be increased, $31.4 trillion debt ceiling be increased without any conditions, without any spending cuts, warning that trying to do so would avert a fiscal disaster here. But Kevin McCarthy had a different approach. He demanded spending cuts, a whole slew of conditions. Ultimately, the White House was forced to negotiate and make a range of concessions that is angering both sides of the aisle. Some liberals upset and also some conservatives upset with the deal that McCarthy cut. Now, a little bit about the deal. 2-year suspension of the debt limit essentially would expire in January of 2025. That has caused some concern on the right. They believe that it should have only been 1 year for preventing them from fighting this again next year in an election year. Also, would ensure that veterans' medical care is not impacted by the spending cuts that would have happened across the board on domestic programs. There's essentially for defense programs, there's not a cut for defense, but that has caused some concerns among defense hawks who believe that is not, they need to have more money for the Pentagon. So expect some pushback from the right on that. But there's also, it would expand work requirements for food stamp recipients. That has caused a lot of angst on the left. And it has a whole host of other issues, such as cutting IRS funding. That's caused some concern among Democrats, as well as rescinding unspent COVID aid. That actually had some bipartisan support as part of this deal. And one thing to watch that actually could generate some opposition from progressives is that it would actually expedite construction of a pipeline in West Virginia, a big priority for West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, but something that progressives in particular were upset about. Now, what the White House has been trying to tell Democrats, what they did last night and all the 2 briefings with the House and Senate Democrats, was they could have been a lot worse. One of the things that did not make it in this bill was to impose new work requirements for recipients of the Medicaid health insurance program. Of course, that's a low-income health care program. Republicans had pushed for new work requirements for those recipients. That did not get in the bill. They also argued a whole host of other issues, such as the president's signature Inflation Reduction Act was not cut as Republicans had pushed for, which is what they're trying to convince Democrats. This is the best we can get, even as a lot of folks on the right saying those cuts should have been imposed and McCarthy should have demanded more and should not have given the president as long of a debt limit suspension as it's in this current deal, causing a lot of angst on both wings of the party as they try to get this through Congress.
A lot of angst, a lot of unpredictability. Manu Raju, thank you.
Yep.
We shall see.
Yes, we will. Let's bring in now CNN economics commentator and Washington Post opinion columnist Catherine Rampell and former Democratic congressman from New York, Max Rose, who's also, of course, a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. He received a Purple Heart, among other honors. Nice to see you both this morning. I'm going to start with you. When we look at what's happening here, and I think, as Manu laid out for us, we know there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of angst on both sides of the aisle here. But we press people a lot, and we say, I need a yes or no answer, as you know all too well. And Congresswoman Jayapal actually gave Jake Tapper a one-word answer when he said, does the president basically need to be worried here? And she said, yes, you should be worried about progressives. If the White House messaging is, hey, it could have been worse, Is that really enough to convince progressives?
It will be enough for it to pass. It will not be enough to convince progressives. So you have this incredibly fascinating dynamic right now where Kevin McCarthy and Joe Biden and potentially also the leader of the Democratic caucus, Hakeem Jeffries, will all be working in tandem together to pass this legislation, of course, to avoid economic catastrophe, but also because it is in their political best interests. Now, with this bill, the administration has certainly cemented the fact that it is absolutely, resolutely committed to bipartisanship and normalcy. And in the process, I actually think that they have boxed the Republican Party into this really awful corner, whereby now the Republican Party has to advocate for increased spending, of course, because the debt ceiling will be raised by trillions of dollars, and for increased social service spending, now with an expansion of SNAP benefits for veterans as well as the homeless. On the other hand, the Republican Party can say the Democratic Party did not get any of their priorities in there. And that, yes, is true as well. So it might be the sign of a great negotiation that nobody is happy right now, but this will certainly pass. It will pass because of moderates on both sides of the aisle, and they will largely do that because they do not want to be the reason for economic calamity.
Catherine, let me bring you into the conversation because there's been a lot of drama, there's been a lot of noise, and you say in a recent op-ed that there's already been some harm done, even if we don't actually default.
Yes. Look, I look at this deal and say, how is it any different than what we would have reasonably expected to get from the usual annual appropriations process? It's really not that different, given divided government. Republicans didn't get the draconian cuts that they asked for. They didn't get the Medicaid work requirements. They didn't get some of the other things that I was worried about, including basically undermining the entire regulatory state. They basically got flat spending, which again is what I would have expected coming out of the appropriations process. So the question is, fine, but what was it all for, right? We've gone through all of this drama. We've gone through economic turmoil, basically embarrassing ourselves on the world stage, Biden having to cut his Asia trip short, the G7 kind of being overshadowed by all of this, not to mention probably higher borrowing costs as a result of some market stresses. And we ended up where we would have been had this whole brinksmanship episode never happened. So on the one hand, I'm glad that we, knock on wood, don't look like we're about to have a financial apocalypse and that Republicans didn't get all these other things in. But what was the point? We could have avoided all of this.
Catherine, you and I have talked about, in passing actually here at CNN, how you feel about IRS reform. And I'm curious what you think about the concessions it looks like the IRS reform will receive as part of this bill. I mean, do you think it would be significant?
Well, they're cutting about a quarter of the funding that was appropriated to the IRS last year, which I think is actually quite a bad thing. That money has a huge return on investment, both because it means better customer services and taxpayers are happier and they're more voluntarily compliant, and it means that the IRS has the resources to go after wealthy tax cheats and corporations. So I don't think this was a good place to cut money. In fact, it will expand deficits. That said, they did some kind of accounting gimmicks where it doesn't look like it's materially going to affect the IRS's overhaul in the near term. It'll probably be more of a problem several years from now. But again, it's not making it easier for rich people to cheat on their taxes doesn't seem like the thing you would do if you really cared about getting deficits under control.
It's sort of interesting, though, that will undoubtedly be put forth as a win for Republicans. They got some of that money back. How does this play to your point of, look, if everybody's unhappy, then I guess this is a good negotiation, right? Because nobody comes out the winner here. But how do you sell that to constituents?
Well, there's a few major hurdles here just in terms of selling it to legislators. First of all,
Yes.
Kevin McCarthy has to get over half of his own caucus to support this before it even gets to the floor, and they have not confirmed that they will do this. And that whipping process, as it's known behind the scenes, is not fact-based. This, at this point, will be deeply personal. The speaker wants this, the leader wants this, the president wants this. Get in line, or else there's going to be consequences down the road. That you can't take the politics out of politics.
How good is McCarthy at doing that? Because typically Republicans have done a very good job of getting their caucus to fall in line. We are seeing something a little bit different here, which certainly we saw play out when he was trying to get that gavel.
Sure. So he he will be fine at getting, I believe, more than 50%, because you've already seen leaders in the moderate wing of that party, I wouldn't call them moderate, let's just say less extreme wing of that party, expressing their support for this. With that being said, though, the Democratic Party, I think that in that whipping process that we're seeing right now, what people will be upset by, yes, is the policy, but they're going to be more upset. Legislators will be more upset about two other things. One, did we get anything out of this at our own priorities? Core Democratic priorities. They got victories. What did we get? But secondly, I think that there will be certain angst around giving Kevin McCarthy a win. So they're going to want to see the Republicans show momentum around this, show that they can pass this themselves or come somewhat close to it before Democrats start raising their hands and saying that that they'll go about doing this. And of course, last to conclude, there's going to be folks that want to turn this into a Christmas tree as well. I certainly wouldn't rule out some people thinking about amendments. How can I get my little appropriation assorted with that? You'll see a lot of that over the coming days.
It wouldn't be Congress if that didn't happen.